Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I am one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I am joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Hello, everyone.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
Howdy, howdy.
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
And in this episode, we're going to be covering Midrange in CEDH. But before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
So I've had nothing else to do but just jam a ton of teamfight tactics. Okay, that's a lie. I have had other things to do. I've chosen to jam a lot of teamfight tactics. And you know what? I've made Diamond 2, so I'm happy.
Even though I don't know how good Diamond 2 is and what teamfight tactics is, I'm proud of you, Reed.
Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds that sounds prestigious.
It's like Mythic and Arena. It's analogous.
You know
it's
that
like,
you know that meme, that the new
something.
meme of like the guy, the father who walks into the son's room. He's like, "Son,
are you winning, son?"
that feels applicable right now. Yeah. Anyone else do anything interesting or no?
Just going to all these parties and nights out on the town.
Just kissing a bunch of strangers
clubbing.
On the mouth, you know?
Took a flight down to Malibu.
Right. Yeah.
I just go to like
it's actually crazy busy. I get a great view of the lakeshore, and there are so many people. Like more than you would expect this time of year.
It's actually ridiculous. Yeah.
It's
Wait, more
disgusting.
than that's wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like there's bike traffic that looks infuriating. Like it looks like you can't even ride your bike.
Dude, bumper to bumper bike traffic.
There's a bike track.
Oh my
dude.
God.
There's a dedicated bike lane.
Gridlock. That sounds awful.
It's definitely been a little harder to get out walking without like running into a bunch of people now that the weather's getting a little warmer.
Wow. Toronto problems.
Yeah, definitely the weather.
Yeah, I haven't been doing a whole lot.
Acting like people don't go for walks in Kingston.
Dude, I'm back in Guelph, so.
Oh yeah,
acting like you go for walks in Guelph.
Morgan, you didn't need to reveal that to everyone.
Guelph, I think, is objectively more walkable.
It is. It's suburbia, not a whole ton of people to run into all the time. But yeah,
I don't understand how they made a whole city that's just a suburb.
enough about talking about suburbia and Toronto and walking problems. Let's get into the actual show. So up first, we've got new developments. And Morgan, you wanna cover this first one?
Yeah, so as we announced a couple episodes ago, we held the first online 2v2 Commander tournament, and it was won by friends of the show Keegan and Zach at their first ever event on double 4-color partner consult. So,
yeah,
totally
it's not just
like
this format.
All the new strategies, tons of different stuff you can do. No, but there was definitely some interesting stuff. There was a Yison and Derevi pairing, which was kind of spicy.
Which as much as it didn't do super well, it was awesome to see.
Yeah. And then there was Reed and friend of the show Tom were on like turbo discard. Was it Croxa and Kess?
It was Croxa and Kess. I think the idea came when we were like, I was like, I want to play Smallpox. Tom was like, I'm down with that idea. And then
Didn't you play Smallpox like once?
Yes.
How well did that work out for you?
We immediately lost the game because I failed to hit land drops after that.
I see. It's interesting. Very. So we all learned stuff, is what I'd say. But it was lots of fun. You know, we had a day playing Magic. We had a bunch of teams and a bunch of strategies. And I think I'm definitely going to do it again. So
yeah, I'll try and make it up for this one as well.
And or eye out for that announcement if you're interested in participating next time.
Into the North, your source for all things 2v2
and walk and traffic related content. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Reed, you wanna talk about this
yes.
New development?
There have been a huge uptick in Hulk memes being pumped out since the banning of Flash, and it's fantastic. I love everybody so much for putting out so much effort into this. It's fantastic.
Special shout out to Timothy87, friend of the show, for his awesome, and I feel like almost everyone in the CDH community has to have seen it. It was a very popular Reddit post. I think he got gilded on our on our subreddit, which is wild.
That's
actually
impressive. That doesn't happen.
That's quite impressive.
We'll be sure to link it if anyone
watch this video. It is hilarious.
I mean, also shouts to Nathan because
Nathan putting out all the TikToks.
Been tearing it up on TikTok.
2v2 and memes. New developments done.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so let's get into the main topic of the show, and that's mid-range in CDH. So the first thing we're going to talk about is really kind of just hammering down what actually is, mid-range in
because that's
CDH.
Not a simple question.
It is not a simple question. So I've got one point I'd like to bring up first, and that's that classifications, or the classic classifications in 60 card formats, mid-range, control, aggro, combo. Those sort of exist in CDH, but they're not as distinct as they are in 60 card, in my opinion. The difference between, the quintessential mid-range deck in Modern, Jund, and, blue-white control is vastly different than, a CST mid-range deck in CDH versus a, more controlling build of Thrasios Tymna, because, everything is Thrasios Tymna now. But yeah, the cores of the deck are very similar, and fundamentally every deck in CDH is a combo deck, and you're just jam-packed full of staples, and a lot of the decks end up looking very similar if they're in similar colors, and that kind of makes it so that these categories aren't as distinct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think the top set of decks run a very similar set of value cards. So we're talking Rhystic Seti, Remoras, and that's consistent as well.
Yeah, it's basically just like sort of what you see in general when you have a mix of like 4 or 5 color meta ball in any format, but also like specifically with the stuff that comes along with Singleton. Just what happens.
Yeah, and especially like when we have when you have 100 card Singleton, you get so much deeper into the pool of cards that are good for a given archetype that you often wind up just getting into cards that are generically good for every archetype much faster, right? Like you really only need 12 or 10 or so non-land cards theoretically to build a modern deck, like different unique cards.
Yeah.
Whereas here you need like 70, so there's just not 70 cards that are good in unique strategies.
Yeah, when you have like that combination in Modern, when you've got however many cards you said, like 12 different cards that are actually different and unique, it allows you to build a more cohesive strategy and rely on the internal synergies between those cards. But as you were saying, 100 card Singleton, there's just no unique combination of 50 cards that are going to interact in a way that's able to compete at competitive EDH tables. So it's just you have to rely on good stuff. And one thing that's probably important to mention is that I mentioned that all decks in CDH, I think in my opinion, are fundamentally combo decks, and it didn't used to be that all these combos were similar. And Razakats and Hulk, Consults, or like a commander specific combo, all these things demand your deck to be built in a certain way, and some of them require certain synergies. So there was a difference between these decks that was more pronounced. But since the printing of Thassa's Oracle and Consult becoming the de facto combo, now that Flash is also banned, things are more similar than ever. So talking about mid-range versus control versus all in combo, when everyone is at base running all the good interaction tutors ramp and also the same win con in Consult, becomes difficult to distinguish. But as we're going to get into, there is a distinction to to be pointed out.
To be made.
Well, I want to disagree a little bit. I wouldn't say that CDH decks are all fundamentally combo decks. I think that they're all combo decks in that they all have some sort of combo kill. But I think like what differentiates the archetypes is, you know, something like a Curious Control isn't fundamentally a combo deck. It's a control deck that has a combo finish. And maybe something like Food Chain is fundamentally a combo deck. Like it's just the whole deck is focused around setting up a certain combo rather than looking to interact with the game state on primarily on other axes than just winning.
Yeah, I think I would definitely say that there's a gradient of being like a quote unquote combo deck in this format, like depending on how focused you are on that combo and how many slots and all that stuff that you have dedicated toward a given combo or a given set of combos.
Yeah, I think with Morgan's point, that's something that I would agree to in terms of distinguishing between the different CDH archetypes. But if you were to apply a 60 card lens to CDH decks, I think a player would have a difficult time distinguishing between the combo control and mid-range decks in CDH. That's just my 2 cents.
Sure, I'd agree with that.
Okay. Let's get into the nitty-gritty on what actually differentiates mid-range from these other classifications in CDH. Because this could potentially provide some insight for our listeners.
Well, so yeah, I do think it's got a lot harder in the advent of Thassa's Oracle. So I think if we look a little bit, if we look before the printing of Thassa's Oracle, I think that mid-range decks are ones whose combos aren't necessarily conducive to being done super fast. So things like Food Chain or Flash Hulk would probably be too fast to be mid-range, although often Flash Hulk was played in a more mid-range way because of instant speed wins and how powerful it is to leverage that.
It's especially in decks like Sacred Hulk, for example.
Yeah, and I would say fundamentally, there were combos that were too slow, I would say, to be considered mid-range as well. With, you know, Consult before Oracle was printed was actually quite mana intensive and also somewhat vulnerable, particularly to things like Abrupt Decay, where, you know, you're trying to get like Jace plus Demonic Consultation. You need triple blue plus whatever mana for counterspells to protect. And that was like a 5 mana win that where like if you got Chain of Vapor, you literally lost the game. So I think that decks that were trying to sort of control and then go for a win like that also weren't really mid-range, but something like I guess to a degree Opus Thief, where you had sort of like you put 2 3 or 4 mana cards together and it does something game ending ish, or maybe something like Razaketh, where like your reanimation is a little bit slower and you have room for a little bit more value and not quite as much control.
And
I think
you
those
also
would have been,
because of the restrictions of your combo, and the Razaketh's example especially, you're not even necessarily going for a hard win all the time when you are doing your power plays, right? Which is sort of indicative of mid-range as well. Like there's a lot of times when you, instead of going for Razaketh, you're going for a Janik Taxius or an Elishnorn or something.
Yeah, that's another important thing to look at, and I think now we see that a little bit more with like Slow Nas, aka Seedborn Muse, where it's like, oh, I'm gonna cast the Seedborn Muse, and if I can make it stick, like I'm gonna start activating Thrasios, 6 times a turn cycle or whatever.
And I'm eventually gonna kill you, just not yet.
Yeah. Sigil Tracer is the most mid-range card in the game. Changed my mind.
When Thrasios is in your command zone, yeah, definitely.
Or if Vanala's in the command zone, come on.
Yeah, so I think these examples kind of illustrate one thing which we've kind of danced around a bit, which is actually putting or trying to put a clear definition on what mid-range in CDH is, and that is, the presence of value engines and a slower, not all-in combo game plan.
Well, yeah. So I would say, as a definition for pre-Thoracle times, it was decks that didn't quite have as much interaction as a like full control deck, but were playing more accessible combos than a control deck, and were a bit more combo focused than a control deck, while also not having the same speed as all in, value.
Yeah, I would say.
Basically,
I would say like. Oh, go ahead.
Basically, like what you would think of. What do you think of mid-range? It's like the midpoint between fast and slow, like between like fast combo and control, right? You sort of have quote unquote the best of both worlds.
Yeah, they sacrificed card quality for combo accessibility, but speed for value, I would say.
Yeah. Now, that being said, Oracle has been printed and it has not been banned.
And it's not going away.
No.
Yeah, it's not going away.
So
don't start pushing for an Oracle ban, please.
Please, no. Format's fine. It's very healthy. I'm happy with where it is. So that being said, that sort of gives context for the discussion that we're about to have on what mid-range means now, because it's definitely different from what it meant before the now times. Because mid-range now is, I would say, what in my conception is basically like what would be called Value Town in a 60 card format, or just like it's on like the trifecta between interaction, combo, and value engines. It's playing value engines and combo is what mid-range is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like on the 3-red graph, it's like low on interaction, high on value engines, high on combo.
So you don't think that something like CTC or CST is like really a mid-range deck? Because I would consider those pretty high on interaction.
I'm not sure how high those are on interaction. I don't know. So I would say CTC specifically is like sort of on the midway point between a control deck and a mid-range deck. just because of the large amount of interaction in it. I think like CD or like CST, we can't even call it CST anymore. It's like just like Console Thrasios. What do you even call it?
We should definitely call it CAT, Consult Adnos Thrasios.
but
that's an overload. You can't do that.
Wait, CTC is also CAT then. The issue here. Okay,
right. It's an overarching
bit of a tangent, but it's impossible to call something CST now because there are so many different ways to build CST now that Oracle is a thing that just every part of Thrasios X with a console thing in it is CST.
Let's just call it 4-color Metaball and have done.
but then we don't have descriptions for what I mean when I say CST, which is the sort of lean-ish on interaction combo based list with consult and Scepter hypothetically, but with a fair amount of value engines and high card quality. I'm looking at the CST list that's in the database. I would not describe this as lean on interaction. Sure. Okay, fine. What I'm saying is this leaner on interaction than control is. I guess. I don't. Okay. For our valued listeners, this is what we mean by it gets complicated once Oracle gets printed.
Well, I do think one of the things we did see a big uptick in is what you mentioned with cats, where there are a lot of power plays that aren't immediately game ending.
Yes.
Decks that are actively looking to play familiar training grounds with Thrasios, maybe Seedborn Muse,
Notion Thief,
Smothering Tithe, Notion Thief.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think Opus Thief kind of fits that same description because of half of its combo, generally speaking, being considered a value engine. Like Smothering Tithe and even it's not really value, but Narset kind of acts as negative value because in the most cases, value just means drawing cards.
I mean, Narset's also a stacks piece plus value engine plus combo piece in that deck.
I don't really want to say it, but it does have exactly that overlap.
hot takes from Into the North, Narset is a good card with a lot of utility.
Wow, who'd have guessed?
Yeah, so I think
Definitely didn't ruin Vintage, the other Singleton format. They continue.
Vintage, the other, that's good. Yeah. So I think one thing this conversation has, shown is that mid-range and classifications, it tends to be a quite a loaded term, and people have different interpretations of it. It comes from a long lineage of other loaded terms in CDH that kind of describe the same or similar thing that decks are trying to do. Adaptive, which was used to describe. I'm just not even gonna. Adaptive and layered. We're not going to get into discussions of these because these terms are very fraught.
we're just name dropping them and letting the chaos play out elsewhere. Because
oh my god,
yeah, mid range is just the newest version of this.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from trying to port like concepts that apply really or reasonably cleanly in 1 versus 1 formats to a 4-player free-for-all where there's like so many more axes along which things can operate, and other elements of the format, namely the 100-card singleton aspect, the commander aspect, and the absurdly high life totals that you have to deal with, also like shift a lot of strategies largely out of viability. So there's a decent, like, what's an aggro deck, right? That also doesn't translate very well.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, it's like once you take I really think the life total thing is probably the biggest thing here, is that like once you take being able to pressure life totals out of the equation, things get very weird very quickly when trying to describe in 60 card, like 20 life terms.
Yeah, so what kind of relationship would you say mid-range has to, fast all-in combo and control? How's it trying to best these kinds of strategies?
So I would say, like, currently, like, I think, like, the cleanest... So it's not... This isn't a comprehensive or granular description of what mid-range means, but I think, like, what everybody can agree on what mid-range is trying to do, as in, like, the goal of the strategy, is you're looking to go over combo decks, or like outgrind combo decks that are like throwing in like token grind pieces, and you're trying to take advantage of them, like sort of faking going long and actually committing to playing real value pieces, playing a like really good card density, and just like going into the long game and doing it way better than them, right? Like typically it happens from like blue combo decks are playing against like Godo and Gitrog and whatever, and they're like, okay, well, I don't really want to try to outspeed them, so I'm just going to play value engines and then like interact a bit and then just kill them once they fizzle. And typically that comes in the form of, I'm going to play Timna and Thrasios. These are going to be my only value engines aside from like a Rhystic Study. And that's just going to be enough to put me far ahead in the late game to just like outvalue them completely. And mid-range is, as a whole, looking to be like, okay, I see that you're trying to weakly commit to this. I'm just going to go way over you, outvalue the hell out of you, and take over.
Mm-hmm. Good points. So what are the most popular mid-range decks in CDH right now? I think we've touched on a lot of these.
There's Consult Thrasios, there's Opus Thief, Razakats, and Thrasios Bruce Tarl.
And, of course, a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
You could probably...
You may have noticed that these are all pretty much Thrasios-based decks, except for Opus Thief,
which is a Timna-based deck.
Which is, well, it's just a Crom-based deck.
Yeah, fair.
If you could take it from the value stance, yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that's important about mid-range in CDH compared to 60 card or even like more casual EDH is that your reliance on having value engines is so high, and you can't sacrifice too many slots in your main deck that it's almost impossible to have a mid-range deck where your commander isn't providing you a solid amount of value. It's got to be a card advantage engine of some kind, or you're going way out of the way to make your deck, your 100 card singleton deck have a bunch of value engines. And most decks are running all the good ones already, so you have to go pretty deep before you're going to meet that threshold.
Yeah, and I mean that sort of just comes from a card economy standpoint as well, where like the only way for you to get ahead in cards in this format efficiently is to be drawing a lot of them and to be playing value engines. Like you can't play like stacks pieces, or like not stacks pieces, but like it's hard to play like hand attack and board attack efficiently in a lot of cases. So you sort of just have to go for card draw.
Also, like your value is kind of how many cards you draw times how useful each one is. So the more value engines you put in, there's kind of diminishing returns. Like if your Rhystic Study triggers are just drawing you like Compost and Insight and like and Mindblade Render, then like eventually, you aren't actually generating value that lets you interact on other axes. And I think one thing I wanted to mention before when we were talking about what defines a mid-range deck is that it's not just the construction, it's also the play patterns. And this follows on from Reed's point about, weekly committing to grind or value. Like there's a Rhystic Study in my Food Chain, Ukima, and Kazur deck. I'm not going to tutor it anytime soon. Whereas if I'm playing like an actual mid-range, Thrasios Tymna, or maybe Thrasios Vile Smasher, whatever it is, consult-focused deck, I could very easily see myself spending a tutor not to try and combo and win, but to get a value engine going to try and put myself ahead, aiming for a longer game.
Well said. Yeah, that's an important point to bring up for sure. So, talking about play patterns, what are these play patterns that we should be following when we're playing mid range? Anything else besides tutoring up value engines, or is there other things we should be considering?
That's a big one. So, like, I think, like, continuing from Morgan's point there, a large part of playing mid-range or playing like a mid-range style game, even if you're not necessarily on what would normally be considered a mid-range deck, whatever, because who knows what those are anyway. Playing like a mid-range style game is a lot about like sort of like subtly altering threat assessment as well and using that to make decisions. So like as an extension, or I guess like as a precursor to tutoring for a Rhystic Study, in like Morgan's case, you have to be thinking about, okay, like what do I actually need to win this game right now? Because if it's not likely that you're going to win the game off of just tutoring for like some like consult win and trying to jam it because people have interaction, then like are you going to just hold this tutor forever and like not get any value out of it? Like, because then you just have a dead card stuck in hand, and what else are you doing? So maybe it's a lot better of an idea there to tutor for the value piece and play out the value piece and then try to get ahead in cards to then later on go for the win con. So it's a lot about like altering your expectations for the game away from I'm going to go for a combo and just try to jam it. And also like your threat assessment in like what is a threat in this game.
Yeah. And I think like when we're talking about this sort of threat assessment and what might be threatening over a long game, and developing these value engines and sort of managing our value, like the value that you're getting and the advantage you're generating. I think people often sort of, they tutor their Rhystic Study and they just want to jam it, or people think a lot about putting out their value engines early, which obviously makes sense, right? The longer your value engine is in play, the more value it's likely to generate. But another sort of key thing when you're piloting one of these decks is that you do need to be careful and manage like your threat assessment. Yes, long game things are a threat, but a long-term threat should always be secondary to a short-term threat, in that you don't want to just be going, oh, well, I have to resolve this Rhystic Study now so I can draw at least, one extra card this turn cycle, so I'll be ahead 8 turns from now, when I'm trying to duke it out with this Thrasios Vile Smasher value deck and I'm on my Thrasios Tymna value deck, like if you do that and you tap out and then you just die to food chain, then you didn't actually generate that much value. So it's important to realize, like, one of the characteristics in other formats of mid-range decks is they are controlling in the early game, right? Like Jund will have some removal and hand attack to stop, the faster decks. And then it'll transition to these like really efficient, slightly larger creatures to sort of close out the game. And you need something similar to that, where you can't just be like racing to put out these your efficient pieces. You also do need to control the early game a little bit. So, maybe that means holding up mana on turn 3. Not, a huge amount, but at least representing some form of interaction. And evaluating when you think you might need to be interacting, particularly in the early stages of the game, when ideally you'd want to be able to develop. You have to make sure that you can do that safely.
Yeah. And I mean, like, continuing on that, I know we've gone over this before, but it's a lot about, as well as like knowing to keep mana up and keep interaction up to not die early so that you can actually have the chance to land the value engines to continue on to late game. It's also really important for these types of strategies to know when you can shirk the responsibility of interaction onto other people at the table and just put a value engine into play, and recognizing like when a pod is likely to go that long. But yeah, it's like you have to be cognizant of the fact that just because you're playing the mid-range value deck that you think is well suited to your meta doesn't mean that people at the table are going to be playing the mid-range game. Like, you can't just take for granted that your deck's going to get to the late game to do the work that it is designed to do. You have to be aware that, you might just die early if you're not keeping up appearances.
I think a common mistake I see in regards to like learning when to tap out and learning when to keep up mana is the turn 1 Mystic Remora, because like, sure, it's excellent value, but can you really be a slave to that Remora for 3-4 turns? But if you wait until turn 2, you do actually leave yourself up with a little bit of mana.
And I mean, like, especially in a dork deck, right?
Yeah, I would say going first often, like, the FOMO gets me, where if I don't play the Remora and then someone goes like Crypt and the next person goes Diamond, I'm like, damn.
Yeah, that's
but tough, like if I'm going third, definitely I'm a big fan of turn 1 land dork, turn 2 land Remora. That's just when I see that played against me, I'm like, oh no.
Because also, I think anybody that's ever like been a witness to, played against, or played with a late game Remora can attest that it's just like the most oppressive shit.
This is going to be here literally forever.
Yeah, if you play that turn 1 Remora and your opponent just like laughs and plays their dorks and just starts developing they play their commanders and stuff, and you're kind of priced into paying that Remora, it such a feels bad. Definitely, I like Matt's strategy of waiting a bit until you have some mana to develop it for yourself.
Yeah, and even in non-green decks, if you can go like turn 2 rock Remora, that's also really nice. Like an arcane signet or a talisman or something.
Oh yeah. No, 100%.
Okay, so now that we've talked about how to play as mid-range, what about the mirror match? How do you play against other mid-range decks? Or if you're not piloting mid-range yourself, how do you combat what the mid-range decks are trying to do? Because I think it's been a pretty clear meta trend that things are skewing towards mid-range. This was happening before Hulk, and this still seems to be the case, where things are very mid-range centric right now. So how can our listeners combat this menace?
Well, if it's 3 mid-range decks versus your 1 combo deck, I'm sorry to say, but
find a different playthrough.
That's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, that's going to be rough. I mean,
you might want to adapt a bit.
That being said, it depends on the quality of the players, right? I mean, if they're being greedy and tapping out, just get them.
Although I think actually that reminds me, and you said like shirking the responsibility of interaction. I feel like this is a point that doesn't get discussed maybe as much as it should. Where people who try and sort of force the burden of interaction onto other people like you can certainly put people in positions where they feel like they lose either way, and they're willing to take risks. And I think that often gets, like, people think of that as poor play. And like you have to consider, what your opponent views as threats. So like an example from a game I played a few weeks ago, I tapped low for a smothering tithe, and then someone tried to counter it, and the person after me was looking like they might be able to combo. Like, it wasn't, oh, this is a sure thing, they've tutored twice and they have a bunch of mana. It was like, oh, they're in a pretty decent position. There's a decent chance they could go for it if they think there's an opportunity. And it was like, I tapped low to play the Smothering Tithe, holding up, I think it was Swan Song. And someone was like, oh, well, I don't think you can afford to tap out here to protect this. So they fought over it. And I immediately fought back. And they went like, wow, you're going to tap out and give this other person the chance to combo, without a lot of interaction presented. And it was like, yes, I am, and that's not ideal. But from my perspective, if I don't develop this value engine, like you have a value engine, I don't. If I spend mana to cast a value engine and don't actually get one, like I'm not winning this game. Right? So like it is important to consider how, like, if Rhystic Study or Smothering Tithe is a long game threat, then not having a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe is like equally a long game threat for the person who's losing it. And so I think it's important to like manage when you can interact and when people, it's always labeled as greedy. It's not necessarily greedy if you don't think you can win the game unless you develop something.
Yeah. And that's sort of like the other side of shirking responsibilities on interaction, right? Is like sometimes it just doesn't turn out well.
And like, that's not always spite. Like sometimes it is, sometimes it's like, screw you, I'm not going to do this for whatever reason. But sometimes it's, you put them in a position where they're behind and you're saying you can't develop or it's your fault that we lose. Like, you chose to put them in the position where if they don't develop, they lose, and if they do develop, they lose.
Yeah.
So
it's you can't back the animal into a corner, right? You got to give them a way out.
That being said, hard to pass up the opportunity to guarantee your opponent is in a lose-lose situation.
Oh God, I love screwing over opponents with mana bullying.
As long as you're not losing
exactly.
with them.
Yes. Yeah. We touched on this earlier, but also I think like one of the ways to play against midrange is that if it isn't like a full like, oh, I'm playing against 3 control decks and they're all sort of midrange here, I'm playing against 3 midrange decks. Well, I guess I just have to join them. If it's like you have like 1 or 2 midrange decks in a pod, it's very reasonable to just play a deck to try to get under them and just kill them outright. Because it's definitely like the slots that those value engines are in have to come from somewhere. And a lot of the time, like, they might not be cutting fully down an interaction, but there's going to be some interaction cut out of decks to make room for them, along with, like, probably, like, some win-con package as well. But, I mean, they're going to be tapping out for different things early in the game, and their goals are a bit different. So, I mean, if it's like, there are definitely people at the table that are going to be tapped down, yeah, just, like, go for some fast decks, see if you can't get them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, like,
definitely don't compromise your core strategy, in a situation like that.
Yeah. Like definitely if there are mid-range decks at the table or in your meta, definitely don't try to like half-ass a mid-range strategy and put in like 2 value engines and try to like keep up with them, because typically it's not going to happen. Like you're just not, the deck just isn't built to do that. So just like, I don't know, if you're in that situation where you have to be playing that deck, you're single one deck. Like if you're stuck with playing Food Chain and you can't play any other deck, just play faster Food Chain. Don't try to play whatever else, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing sort of following on from the whole like forcing people or trying to force people to interact, you can often play like one mid-range deck against another because they like in a battle of mid-range deck versus mid-range deck, whoever's greedier is going to win.
Well,
But-
whoever like flies closest to the sun without burning up wins, right? Like,
But like you want to be as greedy as possible. But the thing is, if there's not mid-range decks in the pod, you have to make sure that you're not losing to them.
Yes.
So one of the things you can do is you can, like, let's say two people develop like a really good value engine. One of them's tapped out, one of them has mana. You want to try and combo off. It's like, all right, I'll try and kill your Fabro Elder. You know, like before my turn. You know, I have the mana, I'll Chain of Vapor your Fabro Elder. And then it's like, you know, they're either put in the position where they have to let themselves get set behind, or potentially they try and stop the Chain of Vapor, which makes it easier for you to combo. Or something like that, where because they are operating on an axis where value engines represent long-term threats, that also means that value engines need to be protected and they have to use their answers both to develop theirs and answer their opponents.
yeah, just because of like the length of the game that they're looking at playing, their answers are going to be more taxed. Just because they're not just looking for like last minute count of the win con, they also have to be planning for long term who's going to come out in the card advantage game. And yeah, you can definitely play that up and like you can also bait this by playing out like Sylvan Libraries or whatever. Like if you're in like green, like I think a great way to do this personally for me is like try to jam out like a Carpet of Flowers. Because a lot of mid-range decks just don't want a Carpet of Flowers on somebody else's board because it's like hard to overcome that mana advantage, right? Or just like stuff like that.
Fair enough. So last point we have here before we conclude our discussion on mid-range is about life total management. And this is a point that we can be made, you know, as the mid-range player, you should be aware of how to manage your life total. And then also like playing against mid-range decks, when is it right to stop attacking the Gitrog player, the Adnos player, the Kess, Zur, or whoever, and start, you know, focusing on the mid-range player?
Well, I think we have actually discussed attacking the Adnos player, but I think our points were like, it doesn't actually take that much life to turn them off of their Adnos. And I guess the same can possibly apply for Razaketh.
I think with okay, people are gonna hate this, but I think Morgan agrees with me. I think life total is less of an issue with Razaketh now. Because if you're playing a list with Oracle in it, it's really not life intensive anymore.
Yeah, sure.
But I definitely agree that people tend to overpressure Adnos players, to different degrees. But like it's like a lot of the time for decks that aren't like as long as they're not playing a farm deck where they're built to be as slim as possible and every single hit in their deck is a hit off of Adnos that'll win them the game. If they're playing anything close to like a mid-rangey deck that's using Adnos even sort of for value, all it takes is a lot of the time like getting them below 30 to turn them off of efficient Adnoses. And it can be like really a lot more efficient to start putting damage elsewhere if needed.
Because if the mid-range player is going to try and take the game long, that chip damage really starts to add up. And, you know, they're taking advantage of very strong value engines like Necropotent, Sylvan Library, Mana Crypt. Damage can really start to add up. And, you know, if you get a couple good swings in there, by the time they're getting towards the end game, you know, their mana confluences and City of Brasses and all these things that they need to support their, you know, 4-color value engine deck just become, you know, unfeasible to activate. So
yeah, card is great at both providing chip damage, but also avoiding losing life. Bruce Taro.
I think Sylvan Library is like one of the most obvious ones here because like you could deal a lot of damage to yourself with the Sylvan Library. And I think that people, you know, you play it and it's like, okay, next turn I'm going to take 8 and draw 3. And then, you know, a lot of people will take like sort of on autopilot will take like 16 or even 24. But like, if you take 24 damage from a Sylvan Library and then I don't know, you take like 5 or 6 damage from your lands. You fetch twice, you tap a City of Brass twice, and you have a shock land come in untapped because you drew it. Okay, now you're at 10. Like, if you're expecting this game to go, say, to like turn 8, that means your opponents have, 5-ish turns to deal a total of 10 combat damage to you, and then you die. And then, with something like Sylvan Library, the ability to be able to safely draw cards with it is useful. So maybe you stop drawing earlier, you say, okay, I'll put back this okay card and shuffle it away with a fetch, so that, 2 turns down the line, when I draw the great card, I can actually draw an extra card. And same thing with, like, finding, I've mentioned this before, but, like, tutoring for Mana Crypt versus Soul Ring, like, in a 10-turn game, your Mana Crypt's expected damage, or let's say an 8, you expect the game to go for another 8 turns after you play the Mana Crypt. That's 12 damage on average that you're taking, and sometimes it'll be like 18 if you just get a little unlucky and, like, get chunked by a Crom once or twice, and, like, all of a sudden, you can definitely be finished off. So you definitely need to be cognizant when you're expecting games to go longer about things that you can take for granted in 4 or 5 turn games.
Dude,
Don't just listen to the mid-range player telling you, why are you attacking me and not the ad nauseum player? Because that is... you will hear that every time, and sometimes, you just need to tell them, why.
dude, can I...
you know why.
Can I also just say that Crom is like the bane of mid-range value engine decks everywhere? God, he beats so hard.
Yeah, Crom practically is unblockable, and because you're not blocking with your flyers because they're probably even mind sensors or whatever.
They're puny.
Oh
Okay.
man, though. In regards to Sylvan Library, like, if you can, a turn 2 Sylvan Library is equivalent to, like, an established turn 6 Thrasios mid-range deck. Like, the power of, obviously you're paying a lot of life, but it is really hard to balance paying life with Sylvan Library because it is just so effective. In my experience.
Yeah.
Playing Bruce Tarl definitely helps.
Playing Bruce definitely helps. Pad out those.
God, now I sort of want to play a
life,
Bruce Crom deck.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, man, Bruce Crom.
Get like 8 every turn? That's not bad.
But the problem is
build
that
the
you
deck,
don't get
it'll
any...
look great.
It's not like
you don't get any
and
of the
then
good
you'll play
life
it.
total boost value.
it's not like you're
engines.
doing anything with it because you're a Jess guy, but still, getting 8 life return.
Commander damage, man. Commander damage.
No, but like you don't get Sylvan Library, you don't get Adnaz, you don't get Necropotence. Like what?
You're using it to
Dorks.
hit your life, to make sure your life is high enough for Sarah Ascendant.
Oh no!
Obviously.
You're using it to get as much mana off of Treasonous Ogre as possible.
Of course.
Oh yeah.
You
that's
don't
it,
even
yeah.
put any storm elements in the deck. You just run Aetherflux Reservoir.
Yep, easy.
Yeah, at that point, Treasonous Ogre is just another Biomancer's
Yeah,
familiar,
pretty
right?
much. Yes, but you don't have Thrasios.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Well, that's our discussion. All our discussion on this episode for mid-range. So, time to move on to everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Good check.
Check the gut.
Gut check.
So this week's Gut Check is brought to us courtesy of Morgan. So Morgan, why don't you regale us with your lovely Gut Check that you've prepared?
All right, so this one may take a little bit of thinking from everyone.
No.
But what's the... I said biggest, and you can use that to mean strongest, most common, biggest part of the meta, whatever, deck that you've never played against.
Biggest deck that I've never played against. Good. It's a good one.
Like, never, ever played against? Or, like, very, very rarely?
If you've played against them, but they never did their thing, I'll count that. Like, you played against them once, but, like...
Biggest,
in a pod where you got flash hulked on turn 2, then
biggest part of the
Yeah.
current meta or biggest part of a meta?
you have to have been playing when the deck was big.
Okay.
but it can be historical.
I feel
I
like
don't think
big
I've
is
played
now.
against-
Yeah, the big is going to be very
Bigly?
small.
Bigly.
Yeah.
Because I've played. I'm like working through all like the. Because I'm thinking for CDH, I've played against pretty much every tiered deck that I could think of, and now we're all like thinking down to, lower tiers, and I guess it's upper tier now. But I'll give my answer. I don't think I've played against a Yuriko deck. And
Wow, that's surprising.
it's not like Yuriko is big, but it's not like big, so that's the best I could come up with, and I think that's
I
pretty,
think that's a good one.
So
yeah, okay.
I don't think. Okay, so it weird. This is like two-ish different ones. First of all, I don't think I ever played against Grixis Twin when it was
There's
like,
a throwback.
in the meta. Like
Yeah.
that was fairly large, right? Like that's a pretty big deck. Don't think I ever played against that. If we go back a bit further, I'm not sure I've ever played against a Prosh deck and seen it do the thing.
I've played against a Prosh deck. I forget who brought it, but someone definitely had a Prosh deck at.
That sounds right.
I don't think I've ever played against like a very strict stock Razakats list. I think I've played against a lot of Razakats, like Morgan's Razakats variant, which is I think a reasonable enough departure to say it's not Razakats, but.
Yeah. I mean, when the deck's called Cat Burglars, how can it be Razakats?
Fair enough.
I don't know. Like, it's a hard question, biggest, right? But,
Yeah.
Morgan, what about you?
I've never played against a Muldroth of the Grid. I don't think I ever actually played against He-Man.
Oh,
like
lucky dude. Lucky
when
dude.
it actually had humility in it.
Was not fun.
I've obviously played against mid-range ad nauseum decks, but
What's
I don't think I've
bigger,
ever actually.
Yuriko or Baral?
You've never played against
Brawl.
Brawl?
Wait, you've
I haven't
never
played against Brawl. No.
I don't think I've ever played against JVP either.
What?
Actually, now that I think about
I
it.
can
you
think
have
of
not
one
played-
particular person who only plays mono blue decks that would probably have tried Brawl. At this point.
You have not played.
I don't think Keegan's ever played Baral.
You've not played against enough ASM then, Morgan, because that is like one of the core ASM decks.
Because I never played against. Yeah, there's.
Oh, you know what? I haven't played against very many Teferi decks because I was.
You were always playing the Teferi deck.
Against too many goddamn Teferis. And that I know for a fact you played against a Teferi deck because I was in the finals of the MTG GP Toronto. That Commander tournament.
Oh, okay, but that wasn't
I remember
a competitive.
that, yeah.
That wasn't a competitive Teferi deck. That was a 80%. I'll give it that 80%.
Close enough. Okay.
It was running creatures.
Well, our episode for Gut Check. And before we close things out, we've got a couple listener questions. So, Mystery Bisque asks, is MLD, Mass Land Destruction, CEDH viable? If not, why? If so, which commanders fit MLD best?
So I think at one point in time, this is probably sort of the answer to this at one point was sort of. And I think the only case where it was
Captain Sisse.
fine was Sisse and Rurikthar. And those were like the only two that you had that could do MLD.
It was good in
Yeah.
Sisse, I think.
Sisse, it was fine in Sisse. I think it definitely was like a thing that you could do that wasn't terrible. I think having a Sisse and playing casting an MLD spell was fine.
But
that was a viable thing to put in the deck.
I certainly play tested a decent amount of Sisse, and I found that a lot of the time I did not want to be casting the Mass Land Destruction. It was good if you had the board state and nothing else was particularly threatening. But I think that that's fundamentally the problem with Mass Land Destruction.
Yeah.
Is that it's really hard to be ahead, to be enough ahead of 3 other people that you can cast a 4 mana spell and still be comfortably ahead.
Yeah. And I think the only other place where it was ever good, decent to good was Rurikthar. And that was only because at the time when Rurikthar was good or was playable, it was because Rurikthar on his own, like on the board, was basically unbeatable to a wide swath of decks. And as soon as you resolved a spell that took apart everybody else's mana, they basically couldn't win the game anymore.
Fair enough.
But
so I actually do think
that's only when
MLD,
like Storm was the only like good combo deck.
I do think MLD is actually CDH viable right now in a very specific deck.
Oh god, don't.
10 buckaroos if you can guess what deck I think it is.
Oh, is it blue-white hate bear person?
No.
Not Lavinia? Oh my god.
No. I said CEDH, man. Okay. And we're talking about CEDH All-Star Godo Bandit Warlord right now. So I think Ruination is something that's certainly
okay. Ruination is hardly MLD.
Yeah.
I like barely consider that MLD.
And then
it's
also,
like a short-term blood moon.
on the same note, along with Ruination, because actually Godo is running a lot of utility lands, so Ruination is kind of hard to fit in unless you're going like very dedicated towards
so you
that.
Can't even play the fake MLD spell.
the other fake MLD that you can run is From the Ashes, which I think is actually pretty interesting, considering most of the 4-color decks, running 1 or 2 basics at most. So you get to completely wipe everyone's mana, set them back quite a bit, and then just refill your utility land, the utility lands that you destroyed with basic mountains, because you run a lot.
Honestly, though, man, if you could cast a wildfire and actually pull it off, I think that would be huge. That hits a lot.
Yeah, honestly,
6
like
mana.
I feel like I've like thought about that a few times, trying to find a deck that can like attack dorks and lands. But like the problem is that rocks are just so easy to attack, and like clearly that's what you're gonna have to lean on if you're like playing wildfire.
I have an answer for you. It's called Saheeli the Gifted.
I think the issue with wildfire.
Hard pass.
I think the issue with wildfire is that anything that can cast wildfire can probably cast any other large spell that would just win the game, right?
Yes.
Yes,
there's an element of that.
Largely speaking, if you can cast a wildfire, you can cast a consecrated sphinx, and I'd put like $100 on a consecrated sphinx winning the game most of the time over a wildfire.
Yeah, fundamentally the problem with MLD is that you have to be ahead, and when there's 3 opponents and 1 you, that's like a much less consistent state to be in than it is when there's only 1 opponent.
It's just really hard to, and it's also because of the inconsistency of being able to find these effects. And like the inconsistency, or like the relatively low density of like things that are good with wildfires or MLD cards, it's hard to build a deck that consistently can cast them and be ahead after casting them. Like it's really difficult to like always have the combinations of cards that put you ahead.
And like it's so easy to get blown out.
Yeah.
Like let's say you're like super clever, and so you're playing your like big brain Elsha wildfire anti-dork anti-land deck, and you're like, nice, I'll play this rock, and then that'll make Elsha a 4/4, and then I'll cast wildfire, should be a 5/5, I'll wipe all my opponent's creatures and blow up their lands, and one of them's like, cool, Chain of Vapor your Elsha.
Yeah, no
and you're like
100%.
Oh no.
100%. I remember playing against, like, in the early phases of John Planeswalker.
Windgrace.
Yeah, in the early days of playing against, like when Windgrace first got spoiled, I was playing against a Windgrace deck with some MLD in it. It wasn't even an MLD deck, but it was with some MLD in it. Got like the perfect draw, casted Jokel Hops with Windgrace on the board, and I went, great, floated blue mana. Resolves, chain the Windgrace. Great. Now we're all back to the terrible position, because you never got to down ticket.
And there's like a decent prevalence of some cards that just completely blanket. Like if someone plays Smothering Die, that's like, nice Armageddon idiot.
Yep. Okay, our next and final question comes to us from N Slover, who I believe is the person who made our podcast logo.
Indeed.
So
sure
is. So N Slover asks, what are your personal favorite commanders / decks in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 colors?
I'm
Wow,
interested.
no colorless? Get out of here.
I'm interested if we all have the same 5-color deck that we enjoy. Actually, probably not, because this isn't CDH only, so we're not going to.
There's zero
Okay,
chance.
never mind.
Yeah, I'm gonna. This
I don't think
takes
I've
some
had a
plunking.
5-color deck.
I can quickly name mine, I think.
I have.
I don't know if I can do. I feel like 4 colors the hardest one to decide.
Okay, so we took a little break to deliberate and decide on what our actual favorite decks are in these, and we didn't take so long that we're super confident in our answers. This is just the first things that we were able to come up with that were at least a bit satisfying. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in the normal order, and we're each gonna give our first. We're gonna start with 1 color, and then I'll give our answers, and move on to 2 color, etc., etc. So I'll start, and my favorite 1 color deck is Goreclaw. At least right now, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Thanks,
Definitely
Matt.
a fan. And I think it's a close tie, but I'd say that my favorite monocolored deck is Kiki Jiki. Before
Oh, your Kiki Jiki deck was so good.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Well, it's dead, dude. It's dead.
Primer coming soon.
Trademark.
I gotta say, I think mine is probably Nissa Vasput Seer. Because that deck is sick. It's like, I know none of you have played against it really, but like in its fully...
I played against it.
What?
Not yours specifically.
No, I played against your list.
No. Sorry, that was
a
the
few
list that I
times.
sort of like half threw together from what still existed of it. The full
I see.
list at its like most comprehensive is like this awesome like top deck control mono green deck where like you're using Nissa to like clear the top card of your library, and you're playing like all the Vizier, the menageries that you can. And so like you're just like playing the top card of your library continuously, and then you kill people by animating your lands. It's great.
And my favorite monocolor deck is Varchild, Betrayer of Keldor. Because I don't know, tokens are cool. Like the fact that you have to jump through some hoops to enable it, I find really interesting. It's like kind of aggressive, kind of combo-y, and just I also enjoy playing like in more casual formats. I enjoy playing impulse draw effects, which is sort of what you have to do in red. I just find that that's like an interesting. Like it presents an interesting challenge for how to navigate a game. Like you exile something you want to cast, but it's, kind of messes up your curve. It's like, oh, well, I lose access to this if I don't use it. And it's like a way of building in a challenge into gameplay that isn't like when you're playing against opponents who aren't necessarily taking things super seriously.
Okay, so on to 2 color. And my favorite 2 color commander is... Well, you guys do this
Is
one.
it the Gitrog monster?
Sorry, Morgan. It was actually Momir Vig.
It's Marin.
Yes.
No,
It's always Hackball.
No, yeah, it's Gitrog Monster. Surprising no one.
Yeah. Well, for my 2-color deck, and by the way, 2-color decks are really the peak of Commander in my mind.
Agreed.
Because it's like you get the value, but you also have to be creative. So mine is Wart, and it's a storm-based deck, and I love it so much because honestly, every single game you end with like 30 or less cards in your library just strictly through tutoring and drawing, and everyone else at the table is so happy that you're spending all your time with literally you get all your basic lands in your deck into play consistently. So you have
watching Matt
30
play
lands in play.
Wart against like casual players. Like his deck, it's like a mid-power deck, so it's not like he's like pub stomping or anything. But when Matt wins with Wart, I have never seen people like watch a storm deck go off and just like jerk off for 20 minutes straight and be so happy about it.
Okay, like here, you want like the real like seal of approval? I've lost to that deck plenty of times. I considered putting it as my favorite 2-color deck.
So did
It's
I.
an awesome
So did I.
deck.
Cool. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, mine's probably easily callable as well. Not a hard one to guess.
Is it Hackball?
Yeah, dude. Always Hackball. No, it's for alls.
Ye boy,
100% of the
Gary
time.
squad.
Yeah.
And honestly,
Alright.
it doesn't even matter what version of the deck, because casual is just as fun as competitive.
Dude, exiling a death shadow.
Oh, yeah.
Scavenging
Oh,
it all
yeah.
out. Oh, baby.
That's my kind of shit.
And my favorite 2-color deck is Mizzix of the Ismagnus, and I just want
Yeah.
it to work.
Honestly, man,
There's so much fun stuff.
Mizzix is sweet. Yeah, Mizzix is a lot of fun.
That's a storm deck that gets absolutely zero love.
I know, right?
Okay.
It's the difference between 2 and 3 toughness. Honestly, like,
Very close.
Yeah.
For 3, 4, and 5 color, I had a lot of difficulty here because
I feel like everybody has
like
issues
Matt-
with 3-color.
2 color is the spirit of EDH, man. Don't
It really is.
change my mind.
but it's, I mean, in his pure sense, it absolutely isn't because
Yeah,
of Elder
3-color
Dragons.
is literally the spirit of EDH.
For 3 color, I'm just gonna pick Anafenza because that's one of the 3 color decks I own, and I put in work to it. So sure, not happy about it, but yeah.
I know Anafenza's sweet.
Lyndon's not happy about his favorite deck.
I'm not proud of it, but for my 3 color, I think it's like there's a lot of I've played a lot of fun 3 color decks, but I think the one that was historically the most fun for me was my Tasker Secret Commander Gitrog deck. And this is before like Jace and Thassa's Oracle, and it's like a high power deck, so you're trying to clean up Sculpt and Necromancy a Labman as your primary win condition.
Yeah, I like
know.
that deck. That was a spicy deck.
Yeah, and it didn't run too many counter spells, but it certainly could compete on the stack. It was a fun deck.
I think I gotta say Riku Scapeshift. Because
Yeah, that sounds.
that deck is sweet. So it's not so you might be thinking, oh god, it's some random landfall list. God, this sounds terrible. Oh, you must be feeling like fucking Avenger of Zendikar and all that stuff. No. This deck is trying to kill people with Valakut in EDH. And it's fantastic. You get to play time-honored classics like Tunneling Geopede, Oakum or Halkite, Realm Right to turn all your lands into mountains. it's a great time.
And my favorite 3-color deck, as I brace for the rage, is Mercil.
Low. Wow, you didn't even.
I don't think there's.
Can't imagine you didn't pick Moltrotha. That's such a betrayal.
Morgan enjoys watching the torment
I
on
don't
people's
know.
face far too much to.
Yeah,
No, I
think
just love
Mercil is just like a masterpiece in its category of making people suffer. Like it really is.
No, but
I haven't
even like all the
come
other
close.
brews of Mercil that I've like theory crafted, like the token brew and the reanimator brew.
It's impossible to
there's
make
just-
it fun.
There's just so many there's so many cards that it can do things with that like no other deck like does in any like remotely similar way.
Amaranthine Wall is still the most hilarious thing I've ever seen.
That was a great game of Conquest. Someone was playing Zergo Helm Smasher, and I just drew the Amaranthine Wall. I was like, I'm just gonna play this, and then I'll have a 0/6 indestructible blocker. Nice Zergo.
Have fun.
For 4 color, I'm gonna pick a deck that I haven't finished brewing yet. It's like an eggs deck that's built around Silas and another partner. Although I haven't decided whether it's going to be Bruce Tarl or Sidar Kondo yet, so that's my answer. It's either it's one of those pairs, whatever I decide.
Sans red eggs. Interesting. I'm a fan.
You can do Sans Red Eggs.
Yeah, no, I'm on board.
Yeah, for my 4 color, I think this is one that you guys can easily guess as well, but Thras Brews has been the one competitive deck, I think, besides Teferi that I've stuck with for the longest, so kind of just it's like it's value to the point where there aren't win conditions, like, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't played it. I haven't played against it since like the Flash ban. I don't know where it is now because
I think it's better.
I mean, it's got Zerta,
but not
and
stuff.
stuff.
Not because of Flash, but because of Kanan
Basalt
and
model.
Zerta.
yeah, it's pretty gross.
And like I was already on Nyx Bloom Ancient, right? So it's all like redundant.
I think I gotta say pre. Well, I guess I don't have to say pre anything. Just Shuffle Hulk. That deck had so many hours put into it, and I don't know.
Yeah, it sucks that you got your favorite deck taken away, but
Yeah,
I think
I mean it sucks, but it's gotta end at some point, right? Like I don't think I was ever expecting Flash to continue existing, even before Oracle. So had to go eventually. But man, that deck was fun to play. And it just like there were so many lines of play and like so much stuff that you could do with it. It was great.
It will not be missed.
No F's in chat, please.
So many F's in chat. Everybody who is a Hulk player or former Hulk player, F's in chat. I want to see F's on every single release of this podcast. YouTube, all of our podcast pages.
People are gonna think one of us is dead.
If you can find a comment section on like Spotify, just put the F's right there. If you saw this one on Facebook, Reddit, F's in chat.
Morgan,
If you want to come to our Discord server, it'll be in the description. F's in chat in the Discord server.
So I'll just mute and read out for this part. My favorite 4-color deck is Chrome Punch. That deck,
Chrome
I
Punch
just
is cool. Yeah.
I love. First of all, I love the idea of like trying to actually have a commander that isn't useless in a food chain deck. And then I love like sort of the Mimi win condition
Of Inkmoth Nexus.
well, I mean also just Crom,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, Crom Punch was a Crom Rayhan food chain brew.
Built by
So the idea
Touch.
was like the idea was you could like you combo off with food chain. Hopefully you have like one of the few outlets that the deck ran. Like if you have like Walking Blister or something, then obviously you just win on the spot. But the floor is that you can cast Crom, who has flying and haste, and then cast Rayhan a bunch of times and make your board infinitely large, which includes like your Castrum Exile creature at the very least, and possibly dorks that you have lying around. And then you get to kill like the most threatening person with an infinitely large Crom, and have an infinitely large board for the next turn. And I don't know, I just find that hilarious.
It is fantastic.
Yeah.
And for 5-color, I just want to say that I generally do not like 5-color decks. It's just we've talked about the 5-color problem before in CEDH. I also just hate it in mid-power EDH. Makes just so many like boring, uninspired brews. But yeah, okay. Now time to talk about my favorite commander in 5-color, which is the spawn of many boring, uninspired brews. But I have a love-hate relationship with it because I generate so many of these uninspired brews. And that's Golos. And I don't build the standard like I think this is all for mid power, but I haven't done any of the like Golos Narset builds where it's like turbo turns and repeated activations of Golos. I've done every time I built with Golos, I've always made the stipulation that I can't activate his ability, and even then he's still too much, and it's like
It's just too good.
but I can't resist keeping going back to brew more. But yeah, that's Golos is my answer.
Golos is Linden's rebound.
Well, I don't have. In fact, I don't even think I've ever actually built a 5-color deck in paper. But my best 5-color brew that I'd be the most interested in building, except for the price of it being absurdly high, is Amorphon Secret Commander Kethis deck. And it sounds exactly like, it sounds just as bad as its title. It's definitely low power, but it's fun to play test.
I gotta say, okay, it's a tie between the rush to tie the game deck, where you try to get
Twilight Sparkle,
whatever divine intervention, right?
Oh no, okay. I thought you were talking about the My Little Pony crossover card.
No. Okay, it's
the one that makes everyone win.
Yeah, no. My favorite is either the 5-color divine intervention deck to try to turbo out divine intervention and draw the game as quickly as possible, and that's your win condition. Or There's the Door. There's the Door is a fantastic deck.
Yeah. That is one thing you can do in 5-color that you can't do
Yeah.
in any other colors.
I guess we then also have to give a meme shout out to the Turing machine deck.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
But my favorite, I do have to give I have to give some respect. Here's where we really need some F's in the chat for my boy Niv Mizzet Reborn.
Yes.
Oh god.
But my favorite 5-color commander, and one of the few 5-color commanders who I think is actually interesting, is Ramos Dragon Engine.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew you'd say
Of course you knew it. I've made no secret of this. Dude, you could play Food Chain.
I was thinking the same too.
You could play Food Chain.
Right.
Yeah.
You can
Also,
play
I want to point out about
the
my
Conflux combo lines. Those are fun.
I want to point out with my answer for Golos. Every time I built a Golos deck, it's also so I make it so I can't activate the ability, and I do that because I never played it as a true 5-color deck. So like Matt, I don't think I've ever actually played like a deck that actually utilizes all 5 colors, because I was just color restricted myself into like Bant or something. Why can't Wizards print the Golos ETB on a creature that isn't stupid?
What?
I had a General
that was
Tazri brew
always going to be stupid.
I had a General Tazri brew that kind of died because Tazri was the best food chain deck at the time, and I was like, I can't just purposely build bad Tazri, but...
Yeah. Okay. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and help us towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a Patreon, we are patreon.com/Into the North Podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our long-suffering podcast editor Roadkill. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Peace.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
I almost always physically wave.
I know. Same. Imagine liking Golos.
I hate Golos and like it at the same time. It's common.
I haven't played Golos.
No, you like Golos. You're just ashamed to admit it.
No, I
Stop
don't
lying.
like. I don't like seeing Golos. I don't like brewing with it because it's too easy.
And yet every time you're lonely and it's late at night,
I have so many Golos brews.